I'm sorry, I get it wrong.
We are happy to have you here as we present our version of a great television show, To Test the Truth. We are honored to have as our extra special guests two famous Americans that were born in the month of February. Here to explain how the show works is the host of To Test the Truth, Larry Cheerful.
Good afternoon, everyone. So happy to see you all here. Let me explain what's going to happen on our show today. We will have 4 panelists who will try to guess which of the 3 guests is really telling the truth about himself. Can you believe what everyone tells you? Today, we will test the truth and find out. There is only one famous leader. The other 2 are imposters. It is up to our panel to determine who is the actual hero of our country. Let me now introduce our 4 panelists. Panelist number 1, Governor Tchaikovsky. Panelist number 2, Akiva Pallas. Panelist number 3, Yossi Kovacs. Panelist number 4, Mark Schwartz. Now we are ready to meet our team of challengers. Number 1, what is your name?
My name is George Washington.
Number 2, what is your name?
My name is George Washington.
Number 3, what is your name?
My name is George Washington.
Let's listen to George Washington's story.
I, George Washington, was born on February 22nd, 1732, in Virginia. It was my father who was well-to-do, died when I was 11. My brother Lawrence raised me. I studied how to survey land. I served as a British soldier in the French and Indian War. At that time, there was no United States. There were 13 colonies ruled by the mother country. When the colonists began the revolution, I was asked to be the general of the American Army. It was a difficult time in the United States. After several years, our army
When the United States was created under the Constitution, I became the first president on April 30th, 1789. Signed, George Washington.
It is up to our panelists to test the truth. Let's begin with panelist number 1. George Washington, number 1. I'd like to ask you about the Revolutionary War. Was that an easy war to win?
No, it was not easy. Our army was small. We had very little money with which to pay the soldiers. They needed clothing and weapons. Very often they were ragged and hungry.
George Washington, number 2. How did you get the money to pay off the soldiers?
I had a friend at Chase Manhattan Bank.
George Washington, number 3. How did you get the money to pay the troops?
It was very difficult to go raise the money. Since I was lucky enough to have money for my plantation, I spent much of my own funds. Later in the war, help came from friends.
Time's up for our first panelist. Let's continue the questioning with panelist number 2.
George Washington, number 3. Tell us more about the Revolutionary War. Why did the colonies want to break away from England?
When England sent troops to Boston to collect taxes, it was an act of tyranny that could not be tolerated.
George Washington, number 1. Who is Betsy Ross?
She was my teacher.
George Washington, number 2. Who do you think Betsy Ross was?
She sewed our country's first flag. I asked her to put 13 white stars in a field of blue, with 7 red stripes and 6 white stripes.
That's all for our second panelist. Panelist number 3 will continue the questioning. George Washington, number 1. Why are you called father of our country?
Well, I was the first general of the United States Army. I also was elected the first president of the United States.
George Washington, number 2. Where was the first capital of the United States?
In Washington, D.C. I took the president's oath of office and the steps of the Capitol building. That's the same place where all the presidents had promised to be good leaders of our country.
It was a beautiful day.
George Washington, number 3. Where did you become President of the United States?
It was in New York City, in the Wall Street area. If you were ever in downtown New York, you will see a statue of me on the steps of the South Treasury building. That's it for panelist number 3. Our fourth panelist will continue the questioning.
George Washington, number 2. Can you tell us about your family?
I married a rich widow, Mrs. Martha Custis, and adopted her 2 children, Jack and Patsy. In 1799, I gave away my granddaughter, Nellie Custis, and when she was married by candlelight at Mount Vernon.
George Washington, number 1. Can you tell us about the mint you helped to establish?
Yes, I had a chewing gum factory that made spearmint gum.
George Washington, number 3. Can you tell us more about the mint?
Yes, I can. It was a place for making money. Our new country needed a central money system. My picture is on the dollar bill and also on the quarter. The time is up for questions and the panelists will have to vote. Is it number 1, number 2, or number 3? While the panelists are marking their ballots, we'll see who the studio audience thinks is the real George Washington. Applaud if you think George Washington, number 1, is the real George Washington. Applaud if you think George Washington, number 2, is the real George Washington. Applaud if you think George Washington, number 3, is the real George Washington. Well, I guess our whole audience thinks George Washington, number 3, is the real George Washington. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and now for our panelist decisions. I vote for George Washington, number 3. He knew the colonies received help from France. George Washington, number 2, said he got the money from Chase Manhattan Bank. That is not true.
I vote for George Washington, number 2. He said how Betsy Ross sewed our first flag. George Washington, number 1, said she was his teacher. That's not true.
I vote for George Washington, number 3. He knew that the first capital of the United States was in New York. I've seen his statue on Wall Street. George Washington, number 2, told the Lion we all know George Washington is a very honest person. Washington, D.C. did not become capital until Thomas Jefferson was president.
I vote for George Washington, number 2. He told us about his stepchildren and granddaughter. He seems to be a good man as well as a good leader.
The votes are in. There are 2 votes for George Washington, number 2, and 2 votes for George Washington, number 3. There is only one true leader. Will the real George Washington please stand up? Thank you for doing us the honor of appearing on our stage.
Keep it up, yank doodle and see my music and a step and with the girl behind me.
Now, we are ready to meet our new panelists. Panelist number 5, Menachem Winter. Panelist number 6, Eric Haas. Panelist number 7, Shachar Lewis. And panelist number 8, Yaakov Lippman. Now we are ready to meet our second set of challengers. Number 1, what is your name?
My name is Abraham Lincoln.
Number 2, what is your name? My name is Abraham Lincoln. Number 3, what is your name? My name is Abraham Lincoln. Before we begin questioning our challengers, let's listen to Abraham Lincoln's story.
I, Abraham Lincoln, was born in a log cabin in Kentucky on February 12, 1809. I had one older sister, Sarah. My father was a farmer, and when I was 7, he decided to move to Indiana. It was there that my mother died when I was 9.
My father married again. We loved our stepmother. It was with her help that I learned to read and write and do arithmetic. I studied as much as I could, but I still continued to help my father.
When I grew older, I became a lawyer. I was elected to the state legislature in Illinois. On March 4th, 1861, I became the 16th President of the United States. The war between the North and the South began a month later. The next year, 1865, September 22nd, I signed the Emancipation Proclamation, which freed all slaves. The Civil War ended in 1865 during my second term of office. I helped to keep all the states together. Signed, Abraham Lincoln. It is up to our panelists to test the truth. Let's begin with panelist number 5.
Abraham Lincoln, number 2. What did you like to do when you were a boy?
I loved to read books. Even when I was helping my father on the car, I always brought a book along.
Abraham Lincoln, number 1. You've been called a rail splitter. What is that?
Fences were needed for all the farms in Illinois. I split the wood to make the rails for those fences.
Abraham Lincoln, number 3. Did you watch much television? Only a little. I didn't have time.
Your time is up. Panelist number 6, it's your turn to question the challengers.
Abraham Lincoln, number 3. Did you have a lot of money?
No, I was quite poor.
Abraham Lincoln, number 1. Did you ever drive a Lincoln Continental?
No, but I once drove in a Ford.
Abraham Lincoln, number 2. How did you decide to become a lawyer?
I loved to help people. Whenever they were in trouble, I always wanted to find a way to help them out of it.
Let's continue the questioning with panelist number 7.
Abraham Lincoln, number 3. I understand you hated war, yet there was a war between the northern and southern states when you were president. Why?
Although I hated war, slavery was worse. The North fought to keep the states together and to free the slaves in the South.
Abraham Lincoln, number 2. Did you have children?
Yes, my oldest son was Robert, and 2 younger sons, Willie and Tad. Willie died in the Civil War.
Abraham Lincoln, number 1. Were the words 407 years ago in the 19th?
Yes, that is how I started a speech at a cemetery in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania.
It is time for our final panelist to question the challengers. Abraham Lincoln, number 3. How tall are you?
I'm 5 feet 2 inches tall.
Abraham Lincoln, number 2. How tall are you?
I'm 6 feet 4 inches tall.
Abraham Lincoln, number 1. Do you know which of our money has your picture on it?
My picture is on the $5 bill and the penny.
Once again, it is time to vote. Is it number 1, number 2, or number 3? Again, we'll have our audience vote first. Applaud if you think Abraham Lincoln, number 1, is the real Abraham Lincoln. Applaud if you think Abraham Lincoln, number 2, is the real Abraham. Applaud if you think Abraham Lincoln, number 3, is the real Abraham Lincoln. Well, again, I think it looks like our whole audience thinks Abraham Lincoln, number 2, is the real Abraham Lincoln. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. Now for our panelists.
I vote for Abraham Lincoln, number 1. He knew that as a rail splitter, he helped to build many fences in Illinois. Abraham Lincoln, number 3, is certainly not. There were no televisions in 1865. I vote for Abraham Lincoln, number 2. He said he liked to help people when they got into trouble. Number 1 could never be the real one. There were no cars in those days. I vote for Abraham Lincoln, number 3. Even though he hated war, he was president when a war was fought to free all people. The other 2 give good answers also, but I still choose 3.
I choose Abraham Lincoln, number 2. He knew that Abraham Lincoln was 6 feet 4. Abraham Lincoln, number 3, said he was 5 feet 2. The votes are in. There is 1 vote for Abraham Lincoln, number 1, 2 votes for Abraham Lincoln number 2, and 1 vote for Abraham Lincoln number 3. There is only one true leader. Will the real Abraham Lincoln please stand up? It is a great honor to have you with us. That's all for our show today. Thanks for being with us, and we hope you enjoyed our show. This is Larry Cheerful saying goodbye until the next time we play To Test the Truth.
I would like to introduce the members of our cast. First, Larry Cheerful is Benzevi Yankala. Narrator, Eric Hatt. Our panelists are first, Remy Rachikowski. Second, yours truly, Akim Pollock. Third, Yessie Kovacs. Fourth, Mark Westford. Fifth, Menachem Winter. Sixth, Eric Haas. Seventh, Shachar Lewis. And eighth, Yaakov Littman. Our Abraham Lincolns are first, Rafi Messing. Second, Rafi Adler. And third, Chaim Yosef Ackerman. Our George Washingtons are first, Yessi Rabinowitz. Second, Michael Glazer. And third, Keith Lustman. Our engineers are Spies Bivak and Yaakov Littman. Our voices are number 1 and 2, Spies Bivak. Number 3 is Shachar Lewis. Number 5, Eric Haas. Number 4, Eric Haas. Number 5, yours truly, Akiva Pollock. Number 6, Yessie Kovacs. And number 7 and 8, Marsh Schlusberg. Your announcer is yours truly, Akiva Pollock. And I would like to thank Ms. Gerstmans for making this play possible. This is from the whole class.
I'm sure you share my pride at a beautiful job. I enjoyed particularly working on this play. You can tell from what you saw today that we all had a lot of fun. And if you look at the scenery, you can see that we had a lot of fun with that also. It was just a great experience, and I'm glad that you were all able to share it. The boys insisted on a party, so please remain so you can have some of the treat. And thank you again.
No one can have any party.
I know she's supposed to be my sister and I have to some water.
Great one. That's what I'm on first, remember?
Make what? Did you make that?
No, they got it. You shouldn't me.
Yeah, I love it. So you want me to do it? Okay, a drink. I don't want any cake. You were great. Thank you. That's nice. Thank you. Do you want a cake? No, thank
Well, that's what I figured.
1750. Look, we ordered 12 now, isn't it?
We ordered the same cake, getting some of the party for us through 1750. Sometimes
okay. Sometimes she only has $3.
one, somewhere or another, probably, I don't know what the trick is. Somewhere or another,
That beard from that's my grandpa's bow tie.
Yeah, I know.
My grandpa, not Eric.
Japanese doing something, huh?
How you got that off?
Water and towel.
It come right off. You have to like scrub it with soap.
No, you just put water on it, and she always rubs too hard. All you do is pour water on it, and then just wipe it off.
Yeah, I know. Okay. You think it comes off easier?
Except with her, it
I
comes
didn't even know about it. You just got about a box of cleaner, and I said, "Want to get it?" You wouldn't let me. Somebody care for a Gerstmans? Take it later. Thank you. I have an older one there. Okay, he doesn't want to go. Where's